Greetings. In the studio with you is Katerina Nesterenko. Today we're talking about this. Pokrovsk is at its limit. Russia's 90th Tank Division entered the city. Occupiers set up headquarters in Mirnohrad, preparing a massive breakthrough. Urgent, the Kremlin will announce new war goals in June. Putin has replaced his ideologues. Russia's fake defense industry, a pathetic copy of the Ukrainian flamingo and lies on live TV. While propaganda praises air defense, its creators are being jailed. Prigozhin is returning. The ghost of Wagner has spooked the Kremlin. After a march with the director's portrait in St. Petersburg, the FSB began hunting mercenaries. A political order was given: purge everyone who remembers the rebel. Intelligence services are frantically checking rumors. Did the chef survive, and is he planning a new strike? Sensation. Putin said the war is ending and he's ready to meet Zelensky in a third country. And Polymarket gives nearly 100% chance for a ceasefire in Ukraine this year. Is the end really near? The next victim is Armenia. Putin is openly threatening Yerevan with the fate of Ukraine. All of this in just a few seconds, but right now, like this video and subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't get lost on YouTube. Well then, let's begin. Russia's 90th Tank Division entered Pokrovsk, and in Mirnohrad, occupiers are setting up command posts to start an offensive. This statement was made by the 7th Airborne Assault Corps. According to the military, Putin's army is using Pokrovsk to accumulate personnel and equipment in order to conduct offensive operations later on. At the same time, the Russians want to use Mirnohrad in Donbas as a bridge for a breakthrough toward Rodinske. In this direction, since early May, our military has already hit at least 11 units of enemy artillery. Equipment. Defense forces shelled the occupiers with artillery, aviation, and FPV drones, as well as small arms. Recently, they say, in southern Hryshine, our Cossacks eliminated 2 Russian stormtroopers in close-quarters combat. Additionally, according to the Institute for the Study of War, Russia is strengthening positions and preparing for a new offensive after May 11th. Specifically, the occupiers strengthened positions in the Kupiansk, Lyman, and Slovyansk directions, as well as in northern Kharkiv region. It's noted that the so-called Truce allowed occupiers to secure positions northwest of Lyman in areas where Ukrainian drone activity previously hindered the Russian hordes' advance. Furthermore, it's been revealed that the territory of Russia's Alabuga, where Shaheds are made, grew by 340 hectares in a year, per Radio Liberty satellite images. In the northern part of the Special Economic Zone, construction of new hangars continues. Also in the central sector during this time, the enemy built additional housing and production buildings. I never tire of admiring the courage and heroism of Ukrainian warriors. They hold the front and resist a massive horde that significantly outnumbers them. So I urge you to support the AFU, and if you can't do it financially, write them words of support in the comments. I know they are watching us. Putin is writing a new war script. The old dictator admitted that Russians need new goals for the SMO. The development was urgently handed over to 2 alternative influence groups. They have a deadline until the end of May. The Telegram channel Kremlin Snuffbox writes about this. It's reported that while the first deputy head of Putin's administration, Sergei Kiriyenko, used to form the goals of the so-called SMO, he's now been removed.
They say, the president assigned this task to 2 groups at once. They must quickly form the framework of new objectives for the SMO by the end of May, so that in June they can announce them to the citizens. In the Kremlin, many considered the president's address on Victory Day too general, and the television image far from ideal.
You know, this fuss with finding new SMO goals reminds me more and more of an attempt to sell the people stale goods, just in a new wrapper. And what do you think about this? Write your opinion in the comments. Why is the bunker's old guard suddenly no longer in favor? And what could these new goals be? Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many watch us from Europe, Kazakhstan, Moldova, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are grateful for your support and proud that we have sensible viewers. Write under this episode as well which country you are watching from and if they support our struggle against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. In the meantime, we continue. Next is the most interesting part, and a few more words about the pathetic Victory Day parade. Russia presented the Geran 5 missile drone in Moscow, a pathetic imitation of our Flamingo. However, the Russian development is significantly inferior to the Ukrainian one in terms of characteristics. This was stated by the advisor to the president of Ukraine and former head of Minstrateg Prom Oleksandr Kamyshin, writes Liganet. The article says that Kamyshin sharply criticized the Russian novelty, stating that in the 5th year of full-scale war, Russia has nothing to demonstrate but a pathetic copy of Ukrainian weapons.
Some mistakenly compare it, Geran 5, to the Ukrainian FP5 Flamingo. This is only because the Russians tried to copy it and they look quite similar. The Russian weapons' flight range and warhead are about 10 times smaller than those of the Flamingo. In terms of its characteristics, Geran 5 is somewhere between the Ukrainian drone missiles Peklo and Palyanitsia.
But that's not all the surrealism. The source VCHKO GPU and RU Criminal Info noted that during the television broadcast of the May 9th parade in Moscow, when showing the achievements of the military defense complex, the image completely failed to match the text. It's reported that on live air, the announcer solemnly reports on the work of the Space Control System command post, while the video at that moment showed footage of a command post, of the space-based tier of the missile attack warning system in Serpukhov 15. This is a completely different system. Next, a new Voronezh DM radar is solemnly announced, a missile attack warning station operating in the decimeter range. The video, however, shows the Voronezh M radar in Lektusi, which has been operating since 2005 in the meter range. By the way, chief designer Sergei Boev is currently under investigation, and his right hand, General Vyacheslav Lobusko, has already been convicted. The Kremlin is methodically purging all creators of air defense systems. To avoid admitting the defense industry's failure, designers are jailed on trumped-up charges. First they went after air defense, now it's the turn of hypersonic missile developers. Well, gentlemen, if you thought that the final word on the death of Wagner PMC leader Yevgeny Prigozhin had been spoken, I hasten to say it's not so. A Telegram channel close to the Kremlin reports that Russian security forces are still checking rumors that Prigozhin is alive and up to no good. For example, during the Immortal Regiment march in St. Petersburg, mercenaries from the Wagner PMC disbanded years ago marched with a portrait of Yevgeny Prigozhin. Coincidence?
We still haven't determined for sure whether Prigozhin is alive. There is information that not only might he be alive, but he may also be planning something bad, destabilizing actions. At the same time, there is much suggesting that he is dead. We continue the investigation, our source in the FSB reported. According to him, the final check is approaching, as a result of which they will have to dig up Yevgeny Viktorovich's grave, after which experts will conduct an exhumation of the body that is there. But this is an extreme measure. For now, we are trying to manage without it, the interlocutor explained.
By the way, the Kremlin ordered the FSB to find everyone who appeared with Wagner PMC symbols and photos of Yevgeny Prigozhin during the Immortal Regiment. The regime seriously fears that behind the peaceful march, there may be a whole network of those waiting for a signal from the allegedly deceased director. Although Prigozhin's plane was shot down and Prigozhin was even buried, rumors keep surfacing that he might have survived. There's no confirmation, but the theory is extremely popular, especially among conspiracy theorists. Well, the witch hunt has begun, and this is a very telling marker of how much Putin fears the ghosts of the past. Place your bets, gentlemen. In your opinion, is Prigozhin alive or not? Write in the comments, I will definitely read them. The parade is over, but the fear mixed with shame remains. They promised retaliatory strikes, but in the end, they swallowed the destruction of the plants. Ukraine and Russia agreed on a temporary truce on Zelensky's terms, but even after it ends, the Kremlin won't have time to protect its strategic facilities. The Ukrainian military announced a big boom. All the details are in the report.
Ukraine is ready to strike Russian targets that Putin left without air defense to protect the parade. That's what drone commander Robert Madjabrovdy told The Guardian journalists.
A symbolic attack on Red Square would make headlines worldwide, but he says Ukraine will likely deliver a slap in the face where Russian air defenses are weaker. Why waste drones on the Great Wall? He said, referring to the increased security around Moscow. If you hit the energy sector or the military, the best strike is on the periphery.
A few days before the parade, Ukrainian drones struck specifically at Russia's regions, very accurately and precisely. This showed just how full of holes the air defense in the regions is. Putin doesn't care about protecting people or factories. His main goal is to show the world his so-called might through a parade.
Yes, indeed, to protect Moscow and the Moscow region for the parade. The Putin regime has left the main regions in the European part of the Russian Federation almost completely exposed. In those regions, by the way, the parade has been cancelled. So we've heard that parade marches for May 9th are being cancelled in a number of Russian regions. This is because the air defense forces in these regions cannot fully guarantee even minimal protection for these parades and other public events is necessary, especially now as most air defense assets have been moved to Moscow. It will not be possible to quickly return them to their original locations, redeploy them in their position areas and put them back on full combat duty.
Moreover, the Russians lack air defense not just because of the parade. The Ukrainian campaign to destroy Russian air defenses and strike deep in the rear has created a literal shortage of traditional defense assets. Recall that in April alone, Ukrainian drones destroyed 38 air defense units and key radar stations. Ukrainian drones hit the Kremlin's image of great power so hard that even Putin himself began begging for a temporary truce just to hold his victory-obsessed show on Red Square. Even after strikes on the air traffic control center near Rostov and transport collapse at southern airports, Putin reacted like this.
The Kiev regime has once again committed yet another act, which is, without any doubt whatsoever, of a clearly terrorist nature. Specifically, it struck the Rostov Regional Air Traffic Management Center, which is a crucial facility responsible for overseeing and coordinating the safe movement of aircraft in the region. This, undoubtedly, could have had a significant impact on the overall safety of civilian aircraft operating in the area. Fortunately, no tragic or catastrophic events have occurred as a result of this incident.
Well, it's no big deal. The main thing is it wasn't in Red Square. Earlier, the Kremlin threatened Oreshnik strikes on Kyiv if there was an attack on Moscow. But as State Duma Defense Committee member Viktor Sobolev stated, Russia won't bomb Kyiv for the air collapse. Russia will only strike if they disrupt their sacred parade. Again, not because of attacks on factories, key centers, or oil, but only because of strikes on the parade. Yes, because Putin doesn't care about the rest.
For Putin, of course, holding the parade is the top priority, no matter how meager and depressing it might look as of 2026 and how much it might show Russia's weakness and frailty. But still, for Putin, the most important thing is holding the parade in Moscow.
Russia is asking for a pause to celebrate the victory. Russia has never risen from its knees like this before. Putin agreed with Zelensky on a truce from May 9th to 11th inclusive, just so he could calmly show off in Red Square while telling stories about the great victory.
That our cause is just. We are together. Victory has always been and always will be ours. Glory to the victorious people. Glory to the veterans. Glory to the armed forces of Russia. Wishing you a very happy holiday. Happy Victory Day to you. Hurrah! Let us all celebrate together on this special day.
Zelensky allowed the parade to establish silence on the front and conduct a prisoner exchange. Because people are more important. That's the difference.
But this is an absolute disgrace and humiliation for the Putin regime. The entire Russian official crowd, the whole political elite and the propaganda pool, were literally losing their minds in hysteria over the threat of a strike on Red Square. And they threatened a nuclear strike and a strike on Kyiv, specifically on the government quarter. They threatened the embassies located in the area of the quarter. They appealed to Trump so that Trump would be a mediator in the matters of holding the parade. That is, there has never been such hysteria on the Russian side regarding threats to the May 9th parade. And it depended solely on Zelensky whether this parade would be held or not. One could say that the classic thanks, Grandpa for the victory, can now be interpreted for Russians. This is thanks Zelensky for the parade.
But now for the Kremlin, eliminating Zelensky is not the only goal. Because Russia is being smashed and burned. Specifically by drones, which most often fly from the Unmanned System Service, which is managed by the aforementioned Magyar. He's the one who became a target for Russian intelligence and a true fear for Putin. The crushing blows of his brigade have become a serious challenge for Russia.
Decisions like these aren't made by Putin, they're made by entirely different teams, a completely different command structure in Russia. So Magyar himself is a serious problem for the Russian occupiers. It was his unit that first became one of the most effective on the battlefield. And then it carried out a major reform in the unmanned systems forces. And we're seeing that result right now. So, of course, it's quite possible that he's not the only one on the blacklist, along with other outstanding Ukrainian commanders and officers, but he's certainly at the top of that list.
Putin agreed to a truce, agreed to Zelensky's terms, and agreed to talk with the Europeans about ending the war. The parade wasn't affected, but Russia's economy is dying due to retaliatory Ukrainian attacks on the Russian Federation's industry. And all Russians have already realized this. Ukrainian sanctions clearly work better than the European ones.
The war between Russia and Ukraine could end as early as this year. At least that's the phrase Russian dictator Putin used during a press conference.
To keep spinning this confrontation with Russia, which continues to this day, I think things are coming to an end, but still these are serious matters.
In addition, the probability of a ceasefire in Ukraine in 2026 is estimated at nearly 100%. That figure was provided by the international platform Polymarket, where people bet real money on various events. Well, even before Putin's statement, the forecast was only 28%. And what do you think? Does Polymarket know something that we don't? Share your opinion in the comments on how much we should trust these words from Putin. And those are far from all the statements made by the Russian dictator. Despite the fact that the Kremlin disrupted the prisoner exchange, Putin traditionally blamed everything on Ukraine.
A few days ago, specifically on May 5th, we handed over an official exchange proposal to the Ukrainian side. At the same time, we also sent a comprehensive list of 500 Ukrainian servicemen who are currently being held in Russia to Ukraine for their review. Initially, the reaction was that they needed to look more closely, maybe not all 500, maybe 200. And then they just went off the radar and said directly that they weren't ready for this exchange.
Putin also stated that he's ready to meet with Zelensky not only in Moscow but also in a third country, but only to sign an agreement. The Ukrainian side has already reacted to these words. Presidential Office Advisor Serhiy Leshchenko has responded to the call from Putin's aide Yuri Ushakov to come to Moscow for negotiations.
Volodymyr Zelensky is ready to meet with Putin anywhere, but not in Moscow, because Moscow is the capital of an aggressor state. Such a format for negotiations is impossible.
Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico didn't forget to put in his 2 cents here either. He stated that Zelensky should call the bunker grandpa himself if he's interested in talks to end the war. According to Fico, he conveyed Zelensky's words about readiness for a meeting in any format to the Bald One. In response, the Russian dictator allegedly said that in that case, the Ukrainian president should contact him by phone. Putin was also asked why the Victory Mania parade was held in a shortened format. Only 45 minutes.
Regarding the parade. You know, we actually made a decision that this year it's not an anniversary, but nevertheless, it's still Victory Day. We decided that we would definitely hold festive events, but without a demonstration of military equipment. And not only for security reasons, but primarily because the armed forces must focus their attention on the final defeat of the enemy. Within the framework of the special military operation,
Putin also had things to say about other countries.
To snatch something from Russia, to grab it, excuse my bluntness. Now, why did Finland join NATO? Did we have some kind of territorial disputes with Finland? No, everything was settled long ago. Nothing is needed. And the leadership of Finland understood this perfectly well.
And he stated that he would show the Finns the middle finger.
And in the hope that everything here would collapse, they're right there, ready to pounce. Now they're already building a border there along the Sestra River. I would have made a certain gesture and said a few things, but since I'm from the cultural capital, I'll refrain. But I think that to a large extent, what is happening is dictated precisely by considerations of this kind. But now, when the realization comes that it's not all that simple.
How about us for over 12 years now? We want to show that same middle finger to Putin himself. If you agree, give it a like. Putin is threatening Armenia with the fate of Ukraine. The Bild publication writes about this, but first things first. The article says that on the evening of May 9th, the Russian dictator spoke about Armenia's rapprochement with the European Union and its possible accession to the EU. At the same time, Putin drew a grim parallel with Ukraine. Listen for yourselves.
In my view, it would be right, both in relation to the citizens of Armenia and in relation to us as the main economic partner, to decide as early as possible, well, for example, to hold a referendum. That's not our business. But in principle, it would be quite logical. To hold a referendum and ask the citizens of Armenia what their choice would be. Based on that, we would make the appropriate conclusions and proceed along the path of a soft, intelligent, and mutually beneficial divorce. We all see what is happening with Ukraine right now. But how did it all start? With Ukraine's attempt to join the EU.
The message is clear, as summarized by the Bild editorial team. Anyone who turns away from Russia and toward the EU risks being attacked. The occasion for the statement was a meeting of numerous European heads of state and government at the European Political Community Summit in Yerevan, including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Furthermore, in 2025, the Armenian parliament passed a law by an overwhelming majority initiating the process of joining the EU. For decades, Armenia was considered one of Moscow's closest allies in the post-Soviet space. However, this alliance was shaken after the war over Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020 and the escalation of 2022 to 2023. Azerbaijan attacked Armenia and Russia did not intervene. Since then, the country has increasingly turned away from Moscow and sought closer ties with Europe. The parallels with Ukraine are impossible to ignore. As early as 2013, Putin exerted heavy pressure on Kiev when the country wanted to move closer to the European Union. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, and shortly after that, a war began in the Donbas. What do you think Russia is actually up to? Share your thoughts in the comments. Dissatisfaction among the Russian elites with the war, the economy, and censorship is growing by the hour. But in the Kremlin, instead of trying to at least reassure the important and wealthy, all efforts have been focused on hiding Putin. After all, the man in the bunker has a new obsession. He sees a coup everywhere, though maybe he's not just imagining it. How close is the rift within the Kremlin, and what are the elites planning? More on this in our report.
The conflict among the elites is intensifying in the Kremlin. The camp of those opposed to war and censorship is growing. A clash between the Kremlin's factions is inevitable.
What is happening is terrible.
This is a brief summary of a recent article from the Washington Post. Journalists citing sources write that internal contradictions within Russia's power circles have intensified to previously unseen levels.
There is an absolutely clear conflict between the presidential administration and the second directorate of the FSB. These guys have gained a lot of authority and have started tightening the screws very hard. The presidential administration is trying to somehow let Putin know that the situation could spiral out of control.
They aren't attacking each other yet, but they're sacrificing their pawns without a second thought. This, as the publication claims, is very evident in the case of Ilya Remeslo, the very same Zid propagandist who previously collaborated with the Kremlin and attacked the opposition, but is now criticizing Putin.
The main cause of all the problems our country is facing right now isn't Kirienko or Mishustin or the presidential administration, but the man at the very top who controls it all, Vladimir Putin. It's just obvious.
For criticizing the government, the FSB even locked him in a psych ward. But a month later, he walked out of that place with padded walls. Only 30 days of detention for a critic of the Kremlin. The story is not typical at all, not in the slightest. This exactly indicates that Remeslo is acting in the interest of one of the Kremlin groups. And that's not hard to believe.
And all these statements by individual propagandists about disagreement with the Russian authorities, about dissatisfaction with them, it seems to me these are manifestations and hints from various influence groups that something might happen, and it won't be never. It might be in the near future.
Remeslo himself naturally will never admit to this, but the confrontation within the Kremlin, according to him, is the absolute truth.
I have the impression that part of the system is already starting to work against Putin. Essentially, it's similar to what happened at the end of the Soviet Union's existence, when people hated the Communist Party and did everything to make it cease to exist. Putin's Russia will follow the same path as the Soviet Union. Everything is repeating.
And another interesting point, the confrontation now, according to the publication's sources, is very reminiscent of a similar split under Yeltsin in 1996. Back then, two camps were also clashing, the security forces and the progressive secularists. But which one Putin will support now is hard to say. For now, he's playing, you could say, against everyone. For example, the Kremlin oligarchs, representatives of the so-called progressive camp, have suffered.
The Russian elite who remember perfectly the meeting with Putin right after the start of the full-scale war, where Putin said that this wouldn't affect you. 2+ years have passed, and it is affecting them. Now we are seeing a classic violation of the social contract that Putin had Not with the population, although that's also being violated, but primarily with the oligarchs. Because when Putin came to power at the end of 1999 and the beginning of the 2000s, essentially, he told the oligarchs, look, I won't interfere in your business, I won't take your money, but in exchange for that, you won't interfere in politics.
At the same time, the security forces are also taking a hit. The number of detentions and trials of military command representatives has increased manifold. Although before this, Putin didn't touch the corrupt officials from the Ministry of Defense. And now danger hangs over everyone, especially if they are people of Sergei Shoigu. Yes, the associates of the former defense minister and now secretary of the Security Council are suffering the most.
I want to thank Sergei Kuzhugetovich Shoigu for what he has done over the previous years in building the armed forces.
Exactly why Putin turned against the friends of his pet reindeer herder is not known for sure. But there are rumors that this is how Putin is trying to rein in Shoigu himself. Earlier, the publication Important Stories wrote that Putin is panicking, fearing that a coup is being prepared and he will be overthrown. Putin's paranoia has intensified so much that he even moved Kabaeva and the children from Valdai, while he himself sits in a bunker without leaving.
At the presidential administration, visitors undergo 2 levels of screening, including a full search by FSO officers. The FSO has significantly reduced the list of places that the president visits on a regular basis. Neither he nor his family visit their usual residences in the Moscow region and Valdai anymore. Staff working close to Putin are now prohibited from using their mobile phones. They are required to use devices that do not have any internet access. These employees are also prohibited from using any form of public transportation. They travel exclusively using FSO-provided transportation. Surveillance systems have been installed in the homes of chefs, photographers, and guards.
It's hard to say who is stirring up the coup narrative the most, but judging by the mood, even the rival factions within the Kremlin have something in common.
Any member of the Russian elite sees their story, the story of Tsalikov, the story of Ivanov, and starts to wonder, where is the guarantee that I won't be the next one? That they won't come for me? And those who might be on that list are starting to realize that maybe they need to act preemptively, just as Beria and others did back in the day when Stalin wanted to purge them, but in the end they purged Stalin. So I'm more than certain that even within Putin's inner circle, there are people now thinking that actually for their own safety, maybe, just maybe, Putin needs to be stopped somehow before he stops them.
And it's possible that through others they will carry out, if not a Prigozhin-style mutiny, then a palace coup against Putin.
Real cringe from across the border, just listen to this. In the Russian city of Engels, a fecal apocalypse has been going on for a week and a half. Yes, you heard that right. While Putin was showing off at the parade, Engels, one of the main air bases for launching strikes on Ukraine, is drowning in its own filth.
Okay, I've entered the courtyard. Poltavskaya 5A, Poltavskaya 5. This is just a total disaster. Pallets are laid out in the yard, starting from the entrance. The stench is awful. This is how people walk. The flower bed is flooded. Look at that girl covering her nose because the smell is unbearable. All of this, I repeat, is festering. My boot is about halfway submerged. This is a residential courtyard. The whole yard is done, so let's go ahead and move on to the next one, okay? The playground is completely flooded. I might even get water in my boots now. The playground, the benches, the sandboxes are still holding up.
Russian social media reports that the main gravity sewer failed there back on April 29th. They started fixing it, but then the city was hit by abnormal rainfall. Because of this, the situation in Engels worsened significantly. Yards and even the first floors of houses were filled with fecal liquid. Tap water was turned off and a municipal-level state of emergency was declared in the city. Almost 200,000 people were left without water for the entire holidays. Rospotrebnadzor was recommended that people drink only boiled water or buy bottled water.
Today is May 6th. The water is rising. Here is the first step. It is already almost full. It has reached the first step. Now I will try to go out. This is the situation in the yard. Here are my flowers blooming. Look, everything is just completely flooded all over the place.
Personally, I like this kind of apocalypse with a stench. Everything is in the traditions of the land of spiritual bonds. I wish for all Russians as a sign of solidarity to also join this fecal flash mob. Like if you agree? That is all for now. Like this video and do not forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you do not miss our next episodes. See you soon.